Since last week's Fusatsu ceremony, I have made it my practice to reflect on one of the ethical precepts. It really stood out to me last Sunday. Turning courageously toward difficulty, struggle, and pain, I vow to take up the practice of not numbing my mind or body with distractions or intoxicants. What stood out for me particularly was the note about distractions and how it's paired with intoxicants. Now, this precept is also meaningful for me because of the nature of my relationship with and struggle with intoxicants. I got sober from alcohol about 15 years ago, and it was largely because of the practice of Zen. I had had early exposure to drinking in adolescence and grew up in a family where alcohol was sort of heart and center. My father owned a bar. There was a lot of drinking at home, parties. I never really saw what a normal, moderated, healthy relationship with alcohol could look like, but I never really tried to develop that within my own self. And it wasn't until I truly discovered Zen that I became really conscious and really aware of how disordered, problematic my relationship was with alcohol, and how powerless I was over it. And it was not just zazen, but the stillness and the slowness of the liturgy, of the zazen kais, of the sesshin that I participated in, that sort of held me. When I first began to practice in a sangha, I literally felt like I was going mad, because I became so aware of how noisy and crowded and grasping my mind was, how addicted not just to alcohol, but to thoughts, to stimuli of any kind, just how chaotic my consciousness was. And Zen as a path of transformation held me still and slowed my awareness down just enough that I could experience, even if for a brief moment, a little bit of spaciousness, a little bit of separation from the chaos of my mind and all that it was grasping onto, to develop a sense that there's this substance in my life around which everything orbits. And slowly over time, I was able to, fundamentally change the nature of my relationship to alcohol. So when I consider this particular precept, I can step back into that world of intoxication, especially with alcohol, and connect with how thoroughly it drove me and defined me. And then what the feeling was like of the initial separation from it, and the fear of losing my mind, or at least the chaotic way in which my mind traveled. But then coming into a kind of quiet, and then feeling what felt like for the first time stillness and slowness. But this week, I have focused more on distraction. So one of my kids' favorite things to do in the evening, if we're not reading a book, is to ask me to tell them a story about my childhood. And I think what they like in particular is how different it is. Not so much from theirs, because my wife is a Waldorf teacher, and so because of the nature of Waldorf pedagogy, they live a very, earth-based, handcraft-focused life. There's not a lot of screen time. I'm in her classroom right now. Most things are made from wood or cloth. They knit, they sew, they wander through the marsh barefoot. They're very connected with the elements. So like today chanting the Sandokai, fire is hot, all of the earth elements, it just evokes that space for me. So they're very much in the spirit of that. But they don't know what like a payphone is, and so they ask me stories that like bring up these like artifacts from a technological past. What's a payphone? What are some other examples? They've never really seen a radio or an old TV that doesn't have remote control. And so as I'm telling them these stories, I'm reflecting on the accelerated change and pace and time scale that's happened over the past, I'm 47 almost, but especially over the past 20 years and 30 years. I'm not a digital native. I didn't grow up with the internet. I remember a time before there were answering machines, and so they're trying to imagine this world. And it, for whatever reason, it encouraged me to pick up a book my mom gave me about 10 years ago. You may have read it, I'm not sure. The Sound of a Wild Snail Eating. And it's the sort of memoir story of an author whose illness leaves her bedridden for several years. She develops chronic fatigue syndrome. She has a compromised immune system. And a friend of hers harvested a few plants and potted them for her and found a snail in the forest and decided to include that with this flower gift that she put in the author's room. And while she's convalescing, or really just because this was such a years-long struggle for her, lying in bed days on end, she just started to observe the snail. She started to develop a fascination and curiosity with the snail. And she noticed that her whole sense of time changed. And it changed for a particular reason. So I wanted to read a passage. As the snail's world grew more familiar, my own human world became less so. My species was so large, so rushed, and so confusing. I found myself preoccupied with the energy level of my visitors, and I started to observe them in the same detail with which I observed the snail. The random way my friends moved around the room astonished me. It was as if they didn't know what to do with their energy. They were so careless with it. There were spontaneous gestures of their arms, the toss of a head, a sudden bend into a full-body stretch as if it were nothing at all. Or they might comb their fingers unnecessarily through their hair. And she goes on to share how she just became exquisitely sensitive to her visitors' use and sort of thoughtless use of energy, because she had to be so conscious of how she used hers. To get up out of bed, she would have to deliberate. If I use this energy now, will I be able to recover it later when I have to do these other tasks? So she became just exquisitely conscious of her use of energy, and also of her use of time, and how she could use time differently and experience it differently because of her observations of the snail and how it moved according to its own pace and time and rhythm. And as I read this, I thought about my great uncle, whom I'm named after, Ernest Tucker. And when he was a little boy, he contracted polio. And rather suddenly, he was unable to walk. And after visiting with doctors and getting evaluated, his whole world sort of shifted. And he, from that point onward, from the age of maybe 7 until he passed away from a massive heart attack, he had to wear braces everywhere he went. But as a little boy, he saw his older brothers running around in the backyard, playing with other kids, moving, and he wanted to do that as well. So in his own way, he started to imagine, develop, and then build different kinds of vehicles for himself, like a special wheelchair that he could use, not just in the house, but outside to go really fast. And then several years later, he would discover sailing. And he realized that he could experience the wind and the sun and speed differently if he sailed. So he started to build sailboats for himself. But in order to do this, he had to consider, like this author, okay, what's my material list? What tools do I need? And then how can I be most efficient in my use of energy? Because I can't go to and from the workshop. I can maybe make 1 or 2 trips because otherwise I'll tire myself out and not have enough energy to build this. And what's my time scale? So it's not going to take a day. It might take me 10 weeks. But he developed a way of being, because of his limitations, to accomplish these things. And he would end up becoming a marine architect and lived on the Chesapeake in Maryland and had a little workshop. And he would build his own boats, some of them for people who wanted to purchase, but often for himself. And he would follow this same protocol of waking up in the morning and spending an hour or more just deliberating very thoughtfully. What are the tools I need? What are the materials I need? And then from that, maybe make 1 trip to the dock beside his house and then slowly work on this sailboat. So he was such a mindful steward of energy and had such an expansive and flexible understanding of time. So thinking about this book and thinking about my Uncle Ernest, it made me consider, reducing speed, considering effort, and becoming slow. We sometimes observe and notice what we otherwise might miss. For the author in the book, it developed into an absolute fascination with snails, and what a wonder they are as a creature. We develop an intimate rapport, as my uncle did, with the water and with the wind, to such an extent that he couldn't imagine himself separated from these elements, but rather felt himself to be an expression of them, and then also to live in vital relationship with them. So when we still ourselves and slow down, we open up to the wildness of and in which all things are. And there's just an absolutely beautiful book that explores this principle. If you've ever come across Thomas Berry, the ecologist, the cultural historian, the eco-theologian, he writes about this. The earth is there as an entrancing celebration of existence in all its alluring qualities. Each earthly being participates in this cosmic celebration as the proper fulfillment of its powers of expression. When I read this passage, it fills me with the same sense of wonder that Elizabeth Tola Bailey, the writer who writes about snails, feels as she's describing her observations of them, or the way in which my uncle would not only talk about his experience of sailing, but you could see it crafted in the boats that he built. And I think the challenge, at least for me, is to not be distracted by or to use the craving for speed and the rapidity of technology as a distraction from being able to observe the world around me. And just as an invitation, since there's a Zazen Kai next week, whether it's then or throughout the week or today or even in this moment, just the invitation to return to stillness, return to slowness, to consider thoughtfully the nature of our relationship, whether it's to technology or just the primordial need perhaps underneath all that for speed and to make things happen, the demand to have it now, to really question that. And again, return to stillness and slowness and see if we can't observe this wild becoming all around us, within ourselves, whether it's in a snail, whether it's in a water, and not only to stay still and slow, but to learn how to play with time, to develop relationship with the world around us to where we can move slow, but also fast, to be flexible and agile, to move at a snail's pace, to hop like a bunny. Just to close with that image, in the morning, my youngest daughter, Eliza, loves to ask us, what animal do you want me to be right now? Sometimes she wants to be a snake. Sometimes she wants to be a bird. Today she wanted to be a cricket. And then she'll perform. She'll literally embody these animals. But you can tell that not only her way of being, but her way of time is changing in this process. And the invitation for me, which I offer to all of us, is to find that as well. In this moment, what is the time of the wind? What is the time of this still water pond or this running river? And to play with that and see how it unfolds for us in our lives.